Culture is what makes the world unique. This idea varies greatly on the perspective of the individual. Along with culture comes the relatively recent phenomenon of globalization. Globalization can be directly linked with the idea of culture and show the varieties of cultural perspectives found throughout the world today. There are many different opinions on the topic of globalization. The ones primarily discussed are those that have an inclusive response to globalization and those that have an exclusive response to globalization. Although globalization does create a sense of homogenization, it is not something to be feared. Through the innovation of globalization, culture will never disappear as some groups have come to think. Out of this homogenization comes the desire to latch onto cultural identity and separate oneself from the global herd. Culture can be defined as socially learned and transcribed beliefs, values, and way of life passed down as opposed to instinctual responses. Cultural homogeneity and globalization are intimately intertwined in today's era. Globalization is inevitable with the global free market and the rapid expansion and innovation of technology. Through this rapidly expanding innovation, different cultures are frequently coming into contact with one another and interacting on a global scale. This interaction is causing like-minded interests in particular groups, but also causes xenophobia within other individuals and among those individuals who show increasing resistance to cultural homogeneity and therefore globalization is Gennady Stolyarov II, editor and author of The Rational Argumentator, a web-based magazine in Canada. Stolyarov's primary goal throughout his essay, The Perils of Cultural Homogeneity, is to point out the fundamental dangers found within enforced cultural homogeneity. The main claim of the essay is portrayed clearly in the opening paragraph of the paper. I aim here to outline the extreme dangers of enforced cultural homogeneity, and there is no other kind of cultural homogeneity possible. The threat of cultural homogeneity is an issue with the ability to resonate within multiple audience groups. Towards the conclusion of The Perils of Cultural Homogeneity, Stolyarov cites the 8 perils of cultural homogeneity, giving support and mild evidence for each peril. While Stolyarov may indeed be opposed to cultural homogeneity, he stresses the need for peaceful cultural diversity, which is something that participants on both respective sides of the globalization debate share in common. While Stolyarov does give examples and evidence to support his perils of cultural homogeneity, the support does not appear to have academic merit, which somewhat weakens the claims made. The first peril listed in the perils of cultural homogeneity makes the claim, cultural homogeneity is always dictated by the leaders, not embraced by the people. There will always be friction between different cultures, primarily with the introduction of Western values, especially in areas where the global marketplace is concerned. Developing countries will often try to emulate the more advanced countries, typically Western, and use those countries as a type of building block for their own. The types of reactions pertaining to Western values tend to be inclusive or exclusive reactions. Exclusive reactions lead to contamination anxiety. This is the fear that a global culture and values will contaminate a local culture. Anxiety such as this played a key role in the closure of a Starbucks coffee house in the Forbidden City in July 2007. A local TV station in Beijing, China, led an online campaign for the closure of the Starbucks and remarked in an online article, "The Forbidden City is a symbol of China's cultural heritage. Starbucks is a symbol of lower middle class culture in the West. We need to embrace the world, but we also need to preserve our cultural identity. There is a fine line between globalization and contamination, but please don't interpret this as an act of nationalism. It is just about we Chinese people respecting ourselves. I actually like drinking Starbucks coffee. I am just against having one in the Forbidden City." The reactions stated by Cheng Ru qualify as both inclusionary and exclusionary. As stated, the Forbidden City is regarded by many as a global symbol for China. Ryu expresses the desire to accept globalization and the Western values associated with the global village, and also stresses the need to retain one's cultural identity. The campaign led by Ryu gathered more than 500,000 readers and 2,700 supporters. If, as Stolyarov claims, cultural homogeneity is always dictated by the leaders, not embraced by the people, then the Chinese government and political authority could have ignored the intentions of the public and kept the Starbucks in the Forbidden City instead of taking the public opinion into account before making a decision. Through this example, it is evident that while the cultural homogeneity may be initially initiated by the leaders and the political system of the country, the people do indeed have a say with what aspects of culture to include and which to exclude. not being subjugated to values being
Throughout the
forced
claim
upon
made in
them,
Parallel 1
as
of Stolyarov's article, the phrasing and word choices determinedly aim to evoke emotion within the intended audience. The use of phrases like propagandist in stating the desire for cultural homogeneity is, in essence, for power by an elite few who wish to impose their ideals of a good life, bringing to mind a harsh image of the corporate society often associated with globalization. The word choice and phrasing in this claim tends to exaggerate the circumstances, attempting to create a warlike mentality with the audience. Quote, instead, the leaders and their propagandists who desire homogeneity have to try to make people fit these templates by using force to punish the non-compliant. End quote. Like it is not, the individuals that may or may not end up adapting to cultural norms instead would be classified as a unique culture. Individuals that have trouble adapting to foreign culture and situations are recently referred to as being culturally homeless. There is no war zone with culture and cultural diffusion in today's modern world. The diffusion of culture predominantly can be attributed to a global free trade market and the increased interaction and travel associated with globalization. Culture is maintained and decided by the people. In a nutshell, people are what make up a culture, and the wills of the people will always outweigh the wills of the elite. The recent globalization movement has led to increased interaction between different societies and culture, allowing for the collaboration on new ideas and a common sharing of knowledge, made possible by innovation and progress. The second peril of cultural homogeneity, stated by Stolyarov, argues cultural homogeneity stifles progress and innovation, that through cultural homogeneity and the introduction of values by the elitist class societies, will develop a singular, static, flat view of the world. The reasoning behind this claim states that societies will cease to come up with innovative and new ways to solve problems. There is no denying that corporate brands in countries that are more technologically advanced and financially secure have a tremendous influence on the global values and beliefs diffused throughout different cultures. When cultural identity is concerned, the communities that would seem to have the most at stake would be indigenous tribes found throughout the world today. A current example of the plight of indigenous people is that of the Mayan community found in Guatemala. The native inhabitants are often tormented and beaten by their Spanish-speaking counterparts. Radio and television programs appealing for their citizens to reject their Mayan heritage and create an overall negative attitude towards the Mayan people. The indigenous people have not been stifled by the rising cultural homogeneity around them. Rather than having a lack of innovation and progress, globalization, and along with it, cultural homogeneity, gives rise to innovative ideas and solutions to keep indigenous people's voices alive. Keeping cultural heritage alive and vibrant may seem like an impossible mission with the rise of globalization and the seemingly forceful assimilation to Western values and beliefs. Through the spread of technology and the sharing of values and beliefs, globalization has not only helped to defend the Mayan people's way of life, but also given a solution so that the indigenous people's way of life and voice will never be silenced through the combined efforts of Cultural Survival and Citizen Camera, two nonprofit organizations focused on promoting awareness and advocacy for indigenous tribes. The goal stated in the article of the group that departed to Guatemala, concerning the voice of the indigenous people, makes the claim that the organizations believe that the indigenous or local voices should not only be heard in times of change and violence, but on a day-to-day basis. While the effects of globalization in Guatemala as a whole may seem to have negative impacts on the Mayan way of life, Citizen Camera hopes to create a change through the innovation of technology and introduce these new tools to the Mayan people. Unlike most organizations that would typically travel to a location and make documentaries or write about an indigenous people, Citizen Camera has taken a different approach. The members who went to Guatemala to help the Mayan people didn't only just stop to make a documentary about the plight of the people, but instead taught the native people and others of Mayan descent how to create their own documentaries and films in order to bring continual awareness to the situation at hand. Stolyarov's second peril of cultural homogeneity claims that cultural homogeneity stifles progress and innovation. While the case study of Guatemala and the Mayan indigenous society does show the negative impacts of globalization at the hands of the non-indigenous majority, the claim is that cultural homogeneity and globalization does indeed stifle progress and innovation. On the contrary, the cultural homogeneity and innovation of globalization is one of the primary means of spreading awareness throughout the global community. Without cultural homogeneity and the standardization of values and beliefs, the desire and urge to give aid to developing countries and people would be non-existent. It is through the homogeneity of the global community that the desire to preserve culture comes into being. Stolyarov backs up his claim by stating that through the static view of the world, that comes with globalization and cultural homogeneity, the desire to come up with creative and innovative ideas is also stifled. The case study of the Mayan people in Guatemala argues differently. Unlike other nonprofit organizations and advocacy filmmakers of the past, who only came to shoot a documentary and leave, never really truly helping the people, the participants of Citizen Camera developed a completely new solution to the problem of keeping a people's voice alive. They not only created their own documentary, but also introduced a new technique. This technique was to teach the local people how to create documentaries and videos, and also how to upload the finished product to the internet. If the values that had become culturally universal, predominantly Western values, had not come into place, the awareness of the plight of the indigenous people in Guatemala would never have been continually expressed as it is today. In Stoliarov's second peril of cultural homogeneity, the phrasing and word choice is much the same as in the first peril, aggressive and appealing to the emotion of the audience in question. Stoliarov continually implies that the values that exist almost universally in the world today are forced upon a society where the people have no say in the matter, as if these values were from a military conquest. While hundreds of years ago cultural values may have diffused from conflicts and war, that is not the case today. In the modern 21st century, the values that are diffused are primarily from the global market and the peaceful interactions between different cultures, as transportation, communication, and technology continues to improve. While Stoliarov gives evidence and support for the claims found throughout his perils of cultural homogeneity, the support lacks academic merit and is primarily focused on appealing to the intended audience. The lack of academic evidence somewhat weakens the claims made throughout the essay. While Stoliarov is opposed to cultural homogeneity, he stresses the need for peaceful cultural diversity. The idea of every diverse culture and society living peacefully is something that members of both sides of the globalization debate can agree upon. This common ground may soon be approaching due to the level of globalization found in our modern times. Unlike the colonization era of history, the mixing of people and ideas is not based upon warfare and conflict. It is now peacefully based on the impact of the global marketplace and the interactions of different people as capitalism is adopted in this global marketplace. While Stoliarov does oppose cultural homogeneity, his idea of peaceful cultural diversity is something that both sides can compromise on.